Hello, I'm Craig Thielen, and this is the 1% Better podcast. Today I'm speaking with Doug Cornfield and Dave Clark. Welcome to 1% Better, Dave and Doug.
Thanks
Thanks
for
for
having
having
us,
us.
Craig.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation for a couple reasons. One of them is, first of all, Dave, your story is an incredible story. I'm really excited to hear about it and how you guys met and what you guys have done together and just how you guys have sort of leveraged what we talk about a lot with the 1% better mindset. I think you guys have a great example of that. And then lastly, your focus in life has been around baseball, and you've been able to leverage and immerse yourself in baseball. And I'm a baseball guy, so I've grown up playing baseball and played at multiple different levels. And I, in fact, just retired when I turned 50. I finally put my cleats away and retired from the sport. But I absolutely love the sport, and there's so many life lessons and great memories I have from it. So I'm looking to tie all that together with you guys today.
Sounds good.
So, Doug, why don't we start with you? We're going to talk a lot about Dave, but just your background and how you met Dave.
So, I have a bunch of kids, and my fifth child was born with no arms. Have a bit of an athletic background myself. We played all the sports growing up, those kind of things. And my dad was a world-class athlete, but also in the sports industry. And so when I'm reading an article about Dave Clark back in 2000, I was transitioning my family at the time from the Atlanta area to upstate New York, to Corning, New York, where Dave is from. And I was to partner with my brothers at Merrill Lynch. And so I'm sitting here reading an article while I was studying about this man. I took a break, obviously. I'm reading the newspaper. I'm reading about this man who played professional baseball on crutches. And I'm like, what is this? Who is this? Why don't I know about this? And probably the oddest part about reading this article in Atlanta is that he was from Corning, New York. And that's where I was transitioning my family at the time. So having a child born with no arms, who was not even walking at the time, being in the sports industry, finding out about this story, I got to my office, and so Dave is from Corning. And so I'm talking to my brother Kurt, and I'm saying, hey, who's this Dave Clark guy? Do you know this Dave Clark guy who played professional baseball on crutches? And of course, he gives me the, yeah, I know Dave. And I'm like, well, why don't I know Dave? Kind of thing. And so as it would be, Dave had just finished a 10-year career of coaching in the Swedish major leagues, winning 3 championships his last 3 years.
Swedish major leagues. That's a story in itself.
Well, there's so many stories. You're never going to have enough time on this podcast, let me tell you. So anyway, to try to make this story short, I wound up, Dave had retired and had a home in Corning, but now he was living in it more full time at that point and not coaching in Sweden. But he got a part-time job coaching, pitching coach at our local pro team at the time in Elmira, New York. But Dave was full-time coach with the San Diego Padres, I believe, at the time.
Okay.
So I go to a game with my family and had Gideon in my arms after the game and went around to the dugout, basically asked Dave if he would meet me after the game. And of course he did. And he's probably sorry for that, but he did it anyway. Yeah, he's agreeing there. And so with Gideon in my arms, so we had a conversation, exchanged phone numbers. And a few weeks later, we met for breakfast. And I guess you could say, if you fast forward, the rest is history. But one of the things that I remember from that breakfast meeting is that when I got done with asking Dave questions in our conversation, his response was he had never heard questions asked like I was asking them. And I was asking him from a perspective of a father having a child with some serious limitations, wondering how Dave and his parents, how his parents treated him, how he was treated in school, possibly all those kind of things, very differently than what was your pitch. Right. I got to that later. Right. But I didn't get to that in the first conversation. And anyway, we had some other phone calls. The light bulbs started flying off. And even though I was a young advisor at Merrill Lynch at the time, I was wondering, why isn't this a movie? Why isn't this story more known? It kept getting more and more unbelievable. And it's still more unbelievable. And even this week, I tell people every time I'm with Dave, I get new stories. And I got a new story about pickle juice, is it? I got a new story about pickle juice that I've never heard before just this weekend. when
Love
we were
it.
putting on a camp with the Minnesota Twins organization. So
Nice.
anyway, that's a long-winded, short-winded story. It could go a lot longer, but
Well, we'll
so
circle back to that. But I think that's important. And then since you guys connected, as you said, the rest is history. But we want to cover some of that history with some of the things that you guys have done together with the foundation and the D3 Day organization and what you guys do. But let's get into Dave, your story. So maybe kind of start from a childhood and kind of your life story and how you evolved into this guy that's done some pretty amazing things.
Well, Craig, I had polio at 10 months old. And I always say the good part about that is that I hadn't learned how to walk yet. So I didn't have an adjustment to make. I didn't have to go from being a walker to a guy using crutches and braces. That was my norm. When I was came down with polio, my parents put me in a what was then called a reconstruction home, and I was there for a year. And the first meeting they had with doctors over there, they told my parents very bluntly that there was a good chance I wasn't going to make it. And for people who don't, polio is I guess it's kind of reoccurring a little bit nowadays, but for a long time since the Jonas Salk vaccine, polio was a forgotten
Right.
a disease that nobody worried about anymore. Put it in a perspective, it was the COVID of the 1950s
Yeah.
and 40s.
but a lot worse.
And so anyway, 2 weeks go by after that original diagnosis, and my parents went for another meeting, and they tell the doctor tells them that looks like he's going to make it, but he's never going to have use of his muscles. He's going to be a vegetable. And that's exact word they used. He's going to be a vegetable.
Wow.
A year later, I came out walking with crutches and two full length heel to hip leg braces weighing 5 pounds each on each leg. So I had 10 pounds of weight on my legs. Doug says, he asked what my parents did. It's very simple what my parents did. It's a very simple lesson. And what they did was nothing. They didn't stop me from doing anything. They treated me just like my two brothers. That's the lesson I try to get across today to people with kids with limitations is that very, very frequently when someone has a limitation, we reel that leash in very tightly. Can't do this, can't do that, you can't do this. And as a child, that's your foundation years. And when you keep hearing can't,
For sure.
it gets in, it clouds your think tank. And all of a sudden you're having doubts. What can I do? My parents are telling me
Well,
I
for
can't
sure.
do
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
And so it was a very simple equation. My parents never said, you can't do this, you can't do that. So the only time my mom hesitated, I tell this story all the time, was when I went to her and said, hey, I want to play ice hockey. And she hesitated and she said, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. And she finally said, I'm going to make you a deal. You can play ice hockey, but the day you come home with any missing teeth is the end of it. Well, I got all my teeth. So I did play ice hockey as a
Wow.
goaltender.
Unreal.
And my brothers were the same way. When I needed the crap kicked out of me, they kicked the crap out of me. And when I
They
needed to
treated you,
kick,
hey, they treated you just like anyone else. Because
they treated
I've
me.
got five
They
brothers, and yeah, I know exactly what that's like.
exactly, and that's you hit the nail on the head. They treated me like anyone else, and I never felt different until I got to grade school. Then it all changed.
So, Dave, I mean, I think that's critically important, that your parents just had this mindset, like you're not different. You're not limited. You're just like anyone else. So let's just move on with it. Didn't your doctor have make a statement at one point that early on where something about you're not limited, but you still have, this is
Yeah. Yeah,
so
my
what
mom,
what 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 was that and when was that?
that was back at the Ithaca Reconstruction Home.
Okay.
When
And
my
by the
parent,
way, that's a pretty, so they took you out of your home for an entire year and you lived outside of your home in a reconstruction home. That's a traumatic event in itself.
but I don't remember any of that. So,
Okay.
but my mom related a few things with that. One, she said it broke her heart when she was allowed to visit twice a week. It's about a 40-mile drive.
Okay.
So they were my parents were allowed to visit twice a week. My dad worked at Ingersoll Rand, so he couldn't make the weekday visit. He made the Sunday visit. But my mom said that when she would come and visit me, it broke her heart because I'm a little over a year old,
Mm,
and she's a stranger to me because I'm not living with her.
right.
She said when she would arrive, I would run to my nurse, and it broke her heart because she was the mother, and yet I viewed the nurse as my mother.
Yeah.
And the other thing that you're alluding to, during one of those sessions with the doctor, both my mom and dad were in the session, and the doctor said something, was giving them the diagnosis, and my mom looked at the doctor and said something to the effect of, but doctor, if he could only walk.
Right.
And the doctor looked at mom and said, no, Mrs. Clark, you want to get to where if he can only use his brain and think for himself. Man, he was that doctor. I disagree with a lot of doctors, but that doctor was dead on, because later on, some 15, 17 years later, there were many guys more talented than I was. I was, not the most talented player on the field, and
Sure.
but when you get to that level, the brain, the mind, the thinking is what gets you to the next level. And there were a lot of
Yeah.
guys that didn't. There were a lot of guys I looked at that had, $1 million bodies and 10-cent brains.
Yeah.
And some people still say I got a 10-cent brain.
I was
Well,
going
you
to
got a
say,
sense of
but
humor.
I kept quiet.
Well,
but
I mean,
but
that's just an interesting story in itself because I mean, your parents clearly had a mindset of, hey, let's just work through this and not focus on the negative, focus on the positive. But then the doctor even reinforced that even further, and you heard that, and that stuck in your brain. Like, I do have a brain, and I can. That's just as good as anyone's brain. So then let's go into grade school because you said, hey, I grew up normal. I didn't know anything different. And then what happened in grade school?
it's almost, I say this a lot, but it's almost like Hank Aaron when he signed to play professional baseball with the Indianapolis Clowns, and he had never racial discrimination. What it was like.
Right.
Well, I didn't know what it was like either, to be looked upon and be discriminated against because I have some limitations. So when I got to grade school, a few things. First time I ever felt different.
Mm,
First time I was ever called names. First time I was ever picked on because of the way I looked, the way I ambulated. All new to me, and kind of a shock. And then I wasn't allowed to participate in phys ed classes. My gym teachers took a look at the cover of the book and said, he can't do anything.
mm,
So you're going to go sit on the sideline after we tell the kids what we're doing that day. You're going to watch because we don't want you involved. Things of that nature were taking place that were totally foreign to me. One of the things that happened was in first grade, the teacher announced a walking field trip
okay.
to the local fire hall about 5 blocks away. All the kids are ecstatic. They're getting the day off of school. We're gonna be outside. I'm not. I'm not. It's the worst day of my life because I gotta walk 5 blocks now and I'm gonna slow the class down. And I'm realizing the bullies are gonna have a field day with me. So she announces it a couple weeks ahead of time. So every day it gets closer, my anxiety levels are going up.
Mm.
Can still feel some today when I tell the story.
Wow.
And it day comes when the event's going to happen, and I try to play sick. I get up that morning. I remember go, Mom, I don't feel good. I get, Mom, treat me like anybody else. You're not sick. Get your braces on. You're going to school. I didn't want to tell her I didn't want to go because of the field trip. So I went to school. Teacher says, all right, let's get going. Line up. I did the only thing a little 6-year-old brain could think of to do. And that was I waited for the line to form and I went to the very end.
Okay.
Thinking that if they all walked, I knew the gap was going to get a little bigger between me and the guy in front of me. But maybe if they didn't look back, I could catch up. And so just before we were about to leave, a classmate of mine named Ernie Pound, never forgot his name, came up with his little radio flyer wagon. And he said, Dave, I brought this for you to ride into the field trip. Jump in.
That's amazing.
And it changed the whole day. Hall, I went through the entire tour and it changed. That little thing Ernie did changed the day from being drudgery to a fun day. I never forgot that. If you don't mind, I'm gonna divulge to Doug here because he puts the exclamation point on that story.
Yeah, so basically, obviously, I shared earlier that I have a son that was born with no arms, and I was kind of pushing. David become a friend and a client of mine by this time, and I was pushing him to write a book about his life story, and he had made a couple of attempts with some other writers. It just never got done, and finally, he hunkered down and with a sports writer, a local sports writer in our area, and they got this book done. Divulging Dave's stories from his journals. Dave's a journaler, so they had all these stories to go with and very detailed because of the journals. And so they finally got this book done. And chapter 2 there's a chapter called My Saviors, kind of like a little S savior, not a God savior,
Sure.
but the people,
Yep.
the people that had a
Yeah.
big impact. And the author, who actually just passed away, Roger Newman, did a great job of just weaving these stories in. His father, a phys ed teacher, which is a story we often tell, but he told a story about Ernie Pound. And here I'm rereading that story in my office when I was organizing 5 book signings in our local area for Dave.
Okay.
Just as a friend,
Yep.
at this point we've been friends, and I helped him, of course. And so I've got this book in my hand. I'd already read the manuscripts and all those kind of things, but I was rereading that chapter. And of course I was like, oh my gosh, I got to find this guy. And I wound up finding him living 45 minutes away, Ernst Pound in the phone book. And I give this awkward phone call.
You actually found him in the phone book.
That's how long ago this was, because
that's amazing in itself. That's not easy.
Yeah, no, I found an Ernst Pound living in Odessa, New York, which is out by Watkins Glen for the NASCAR people, and had that awkward phone call. And I basically asked him, I'm looking for an Ernie Pound that went to Corning in first grade. I don't know if, I didn't know if I was talking to a grandfather or father or son, any of those things. And we've gotten to know Ernie over the years, but he basically said, you didn't want to answer any questions. And then I told him, I said, I'm looking for this Ernie Pound because he had brought a radio flyer wagon to school to help out a classmate.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, I remember the wagon. Now, what happened is Ernie's family had left the area after first grade, and Dave and he had literally never seen each other again. And so When he remembered the wagon, I convinced him to come to a book signing at one of our local coffee shops in the area. And he winds up, it was a snowy night. He winds up coming to this book signing, gets in line with everybody else, finally gets up to Dave. Dave's sitting there saying, "Who should I sign this to?" And Ernie basically just says, "Sign this one to Ernie Pound." And of course, Dave doesn't tell this part of the story because, when we do speaking events and things like that, because he gets so dang emotional.
Well,
to
yeah.
this day. And so we show a video of that. I have a video. So if you're listening in and you're getting all emotional just listening to the story here, which is very, very often, Ernie, I reunited Ernie and Dave
That's amazing.
After 45 years. And Dave cries like a baby now every time he tells the story.
Well, that's incredible. Yeah.
And so that's kind of the exclamation point. And I do now have a children's book that's aptly named A Pound of Kindness.
Yeah.
And it tells the story of Dave and Ernie going to the fire hall together.
Well, we'll get all those in the links on this podcast. But I'm curious, when you reunited with Ernie, what did he remember about it? Was it as simple as, "Hey, I'm just doing a favor for a friend," or what did he remember about why he did it?
Go ahead, Doug.
So it's funny because there's a couple of exclamation points we don't always tell about this story. Ernie didn't know Dave, didn't know he went on to play professional baseball.
Wow.
Any of those things. He just remembered the wagon.
Wow.
And so here he's done a kind act, and so we've run into people that know Ernie at our speaking events. They'll come up to us, "Oh, my cousin's Ernie," or like that. That's happened even down in Florida. And the interesting thing, everybody that we meet that knows Ernie, they always say, "I'm simply not surprised."
It's just who he is.
It's just a matter of they are not surprised because of all the kindness that he has shown throughout the years to everybody. And so that's one of the things. And then I got out of Ernie, which is completely crazy, and I'm going to lead you down a rabbit hole a little bit here. But Ernie was a professional pitcher as well.
Oh, wow. That's a coincidence.
And isn't that a coincidence?
Yeah, there's a lot of coincidences here that are just
well. I led you down a rabbit hole that's kind of deceiving, but actually, Ernie was a professional horseshoe thrower.
Okay.
A horseshoe
and he
pitcher.
played in a horseshoe pitcher. He threw horseshoes at the highest level.
Wow.
World level. He's one of those guys. I asked him because I've seen these tournaments before, and I asked him, "Are you one of those guys that can throw 20 ringers in a row?" And he goes, I think he said something like, "Well, my record was like 24." I'm like, "Oh my God."
I've played horseshoes. I know how hard that is.
Right. So he's in the New York Hall of Fame for horseshoe throwing, and he's actually won prize money, and as a pro pitcher. And so I brought these two pro pitchers together, I guess, in this incredible story.
Well, that's a very memorable story, and he's had an impact for sure. So, Dave, at what point? So you went through grade school. Is tough. I mean, grade school is tough for a lot of people. I mean, kids are ruthless. Kids, say things. It doesn't matter what the issue is, overweight or you're poor or anything. They'll go after you, right? But you had a pretty tough, awakening, and this is, why is this happening, and why? And then you had to deal with that. But at what point did you kind of feel like you overcame that? And then at what point did baseball enter your life? I mean, that's kind of two different questions, but I don't know how closely
depends on what you want me to say here, because
I'd go to third grade, Dave.
You don't want to go to second grade.
No, just skip the third grade.
There's
you guys have all the recording tracks. You've been through this story a few times.
Well, there are a couple things that go through my mind when you ask that question. But to skip to the third grade, as I told you, the phys ed teachers wouldn't allow me to participate.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand that, because in the neighborhood, I was participating in all the neighborhood games. So I knew that I could do some of the things that the gym class was doing. But as a kid back then, a little bit different today probably, but back then you did what you were told. And so I did what I was told. Third grade, we had a new gym teacher. First year for him, named Mr. Snetchler.
It sounds like a
Ver-
teacher's name.
he was a tough dude, a military man, crew
Okay.
cut, no nonsense crap. And the first day in his class, we gathered around him, and I can remember him telling us what we were going to do, and clapped his hands. He said, "Let's go." I immediately took steps to the sideline, but there was no chair. And I thought, well, new teacher forgot to put the chair there.
Right. Rookie.
Rookie. But before too long, I took 2, maybe 3 steps. I heard this, "Where do you think you're going?" And now I'm shaking. Little 8-year-old, I'm shaking. I turn around, I look, and he's going like this. And I'm thinking, oh man, what did I do now? And so I walk back over to him, and he looks me dead in the eye. I never forgot this. He says, "Dave," he said, "gonna tell you something here." He said, "There may be some things in this class that you're not able to do, but you're never gonna find out what those things are unless you try them.
Mm,
And you are going to try everything in this
love it.
class." Well, the activity that day was climbing the rope to the ceiling.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. That's not,
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
tough deal.
You got it. So I'm automatically first off thinking, why is it got to be today that we're doing the rope to the ceiling? Because there's no way that I'm getting up there. And so my turn comes, and he said I had to do it. So I dropped my crutches. I'm hanging on the rope, and I put fist over fist. And remember, I got 10 pounds of weight on my legs.
Oh, you got the braces
I
on.
got the braces on. So
And you're at a multiple disadvantage, but I mean, because I remember doing it. I used my legs and my feet, and you're probably using mostly upper body, right?
no, I'm using all
All
upper
upper body. And
body.
then if you fall, which a lot of kids do, you don't have a backup plan.
So I'm doing this, and I'm elevating. Surprisingly, even to me, I'm elevating. What I didn't understand, Craig, was walking with those crutches, I had a massive upper body
Oh
strength.
yeah. Yeah.
So I'm pulling myself up, and I'm going up, and I get about 3/4 of the way up, and higher than any kid in the class has gotten. And I'm gassed. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, this is good enough. This is good enough. And then the other side of me kicked in and said, no, it isn't. You're 3/4 of the way up. Go. I made it to the top. I was the
Wow.
only kid to get to the top. But now I had the problem you're alluding to.
You got to go down.
I could not form that little S with my feet to I came flying down the rope. But when I got to the bottom, I say this all the time, it was the best burn I've ever felt because
Hmm.
the kid's jaws dropped. The picking, the jumping Dave stopped. All the picking, and I always say that you shouldn't have to do that to stop being bullied. But the
But you gained
bullying,
respect. You gained respect from some of the other kids because not only did you keep up, or you did part of what they could do, you actually did something they didn't do or couldn't do.
that's right.
And
That's correct.
so was that the moment where you realized not only can I do some things, I can do some things better than other people.
Yeah. It was a spur. It was an awakening.
Yeah.
And the next thing we did in class was baseball.
Okay.
And I found out my strengths and my weaknesses. I had great hand-eye coordination. Couldn't run fast. And right there at 8 years old, I can still remember analyzing every sport that I wanted to play
Hmm.
with my strengths.
Hmm.
Where do I fit? Where's my best chance for succeeding in this sport? So in baseball, wasn't going to be an outfielder,
Right.
wasn't going to be a middle infielder,
Not a catcher.
not a catcher, a pitcher, first base. Ice hockey, couldn't skate, goalie.
Goalie.
Football, quarterback, had a good arm. Had to go from the shotgun because wasn't going to be able to fade back. All those things were formulating that basketball. Played basketball, but can you imagine playing basketball at 4'2" or whatever it was when I was then? So I developed a hook shot, so I couldn't get, so I wouldn't get it stuffed back in my face. Those are things that I was thinking about at 8 years old that later served me very well because, as I went through the ranks in baseball, by the time I was 14 or so, the dream started. I want to play professional baseball.
So when you
I
were
didn't tell anybody.
early teenager, that started forming in your head.
Yeah, about 14, and I didn't want to tell anybody at that point. But then I also realized your fastball's not going to get you looked at. It's not fast enough. You got to develop. So I started developing a knuckleball.
Yeah.
And it took me a year and a half, maybe 2 years to develop the grip, the arm angle, the release point that worked for me. Because I knew I had to have something else if I wanted to even attempt to reach my dream. And so the 8-year-old thinking started formulating again at that point at 14. What can you do to reach your dream? What can you do differently so you can stick out and have some kind of success and a shot at reaching your dream?
So between 8 and 14, you must have had some success playing baseball that gave you enough confidence going, I think I can do this.
Oh yeah. I mean, when I first started Little League wouldn't let me play. They told my parent he can't play. He's going to get injured. My parents literally went to bat for me to Williamsport. Corning, New York, where I grew up, is about an hour and a half drive from. Now it's about an hour drive to Williamsport, Pennsylvania, the world headquarters for Little League.
Okay.
My parents literally drove down there and said, "Why are you preventing our son from playing Little League?" They fought for me. I got to play Little League. When I played Little League and was allowed to play, I found out I could hold my own against all those guys, even the best ones. And
Interesting.
So I started going up the ranks right up through. And, by the time I was in high school, I didn't play high school ball, but I played in a very competitive league outside of the high school realm. And I ended up having like the third best ERA in that league. And so the dream started formulating. I didn't know if I could make it or not, but I wanted the shot. The shot.
It's so interesting. And we call this the 1% Better podcast, but it's all about mindset, and everything you're talking about is mindset, all the way from like when you were early with your parents, the mindset that they gave you, and then the doctor, and then Ernie, and then the Phi Ed coach. Just a really simple story. I coached a lot of youth baseball teams, and baseball. You were talking about, hey, when we used to play around in the neighborhood. Well, that's how I grew up. We played everything in the neighborhood, and there wasn't really organized sports until you got later. That's now everything is organized. And everything's uber competitive. And so I was coaching these traveling baseball teams. So they're supposed to be the best, players. And so these are like 9 and 10-year-olds, but they're on traveling baseball teams. Okay. So after you do it a couple years, you kind of get to know the routine. So I did it. And the first thing I asked the team, I go, okay, line them up. And I said, okay, who's a pitcher? And about 3 or 4 kids would raise their hands. Now these are 9-year-olds, right? But already 3 or 4 kids out of like 10 or 12 knew I'm a pitcher, and the rest knew they're not a pitcher. However they came up with that, don't know. And I said, wrong answer. Everyone raise your hand. And so all 12 raise your hand. You're the pitcher. All of you are the pitcher. All of you are going to pitch. you're going to get innings, and we're going to find out, and it's going to be great. And if you can't, it doesn't matter, but you're all going to give it a try. And half the kids were sweating, going, I've never pitched before. I'm not a pitcher. This guy's a pitcher because he says he's a pitcher. He's bigger, he's stronger, all that stuff, right? As it turns out, the 3 or 4 kids that raised their hand that thought they were the pitcher weren't
The
our best
worst.
pitchers. And 3 or 4 kids that were afraid to even try because they didn't have the confidence or whatever, they ended up being our best pitchers. And it's just all about mindset. Just, you got to try it. You got to have an opportunity. But I kind of forced them, like, it's no longer an option. It's just, y'all going to try it. Right. And it's same thing that you just described. It's interesting how that works. All right. So you got your confidence. Baseball is your sport. You figured out how to throw a knuckleball. So I'm curious about your baseball career, and Doug, please feel free to help here, but just huge, long baseball career. And Dave really wanted to go as far as he could, right? And
Yep.
say, I want people to tell me that I'm not good enough, but I'm going to put in every ounce of effort to get there. So maybe just describe, since, post high school, how he went on to participate in a lot of different roles and organizations in baseball, and what that career was like.
Yeah, so as Dave said, he started to dream just like any other child our age, back in the day. We all dreamed about playing professional baseball. For me, it was every sport. I wanted to, and it was probably part of my hindrance. I wanted to play professional baseball. I wanted to be a basketball player. I wanted to be a runner, and then you finally figure out what you're going to get the highest in. Well, Dave started developing that knuckleball, and he was starting to get people out. But of course, he was getting people out in Corner, New York, so it's a small town trial. But he wanted to find out for sure whether he could make it or not. And so Dave literally penned a handwritten letter to every major league team at the time, every one of them. And
Wow.
he still handwrites letters. So if you get one of these handwritten letters, you keep it as a keepsake. And because that's a lost art today. So he handwrote
Absolutely.
every letter. And if you could imagine the GMs getting this letter from a young man saying, hey, I'm on crutches and braces, but I want to try out. Well, the miracle of it all, that 1% thing that Dave talked about, the 1% man, is that he got 3 replies. And he got 1 tryout out of the deal.
Wow.
The lead scout for the Pittsburgh Pirates organization, his name is Art Gaines. He also owned a team in Missouri, which was in the Pirates organization at the time. So Dave had to go out to Missouri and get all the way out to Missouri for this young tryout. I believe he was 17 or 18 at the time, and
18.
it's 18, and he's getting this tryout, and he's got to go through all the drills. He's got a bat. His first at bat was bunting. He turns to bunt, and what does he do? He bunts the ball right in his face. So he's thinking it's over. They're not even gonna even give him a shot. But as it would be, he made the roster. I'm quickening the story. And so he wound up playing for 2 years on this team in Missouri. And to fast forward, it parlayed that to a 10-year career of playing in the Phillies minor leagues, playing, independent leagues. He wound up playing for the famous Indianapolis Clowns because they had integrated white players into that team. And in 1975, I mean, he's playing at Comiskey Park. He's playing at all these places. He's got stories where the hecklers were on him. That these are amazing stories that are always better when he tells them. But can you imagine being in a packed out crowd and you come in as a relief pitcher and there's a heckler yelling at you saying, knock the crippled bastard out, so the whole stadium can hear it? So in a way, he was like a minor league Jackie Robinson, but for the people in the disability community.
Wow.
And he had to deal with that kind of pressure. Didn't always deal with it the best, because in that particular case, he wound up trying to hide his glove, and he gave the old free bird to the guy in the audience.
Right.
And this created probably not the greatest response. People are throwing food and drinks onto the field, booing him. And that's the kind of stuff a person back in the 70s had to deal with. And his coach didn't take it too kindly either. When he came out to the mound to confront Dave, it was, what do you think you're doing? You got to, you can't do this. And Dave's thinking, what do you mean? That guy's just called me a crippled bastard. And he said, doesn't matter. If you can't handle it, you can't be here. And so, and his coach just basically kept asking him, do you want to pitch? And Dave said, yes, sir. Yes, Skip. Do you want to pitch? Yes, Skip. Yes, Skip. And so that created that obviously Dave was different. And he had to deal with stuff that folks just didn't have to deal with. And it wasn't applauded. Like if he would go out on the mound today in let's say a college game or anything.
Oh, it'd be way different. Yeah.
People would be applauding him, thinking he's the greatest guy in the world. And then as soon as he struck somebody out, they'd be like, oh my gosh, this guy's for real. And that's what started happening everywhere he went. In 1975, Dave was actually the fireman of the year for the Indianapolis Clowns. They had him in a relief role that year. And he had 20 saves, 4 wins, and no losses.
Wow.
And he actually caught the attention of the owner of the Chicago White Sox, Bill Veeck, who saw him play at Comiskey Park.
Yeah.
And of course, we could go on and on and on with these stories, but he literally had he had the Chicago White Sox watching him. That's how powerful his knuckleball was at the time. Didn't
That's awesome.
Get that call. That's a whole nother long story. Dave didn't have the same year in 1976. Let's just say due to some outside issues and whatever. And Bill Veeck called him back and said, hey, we're going to keep watching you, but we can't pull you up this year.
Yeah.
And so he actually wound up having another good year, played in the Phillies organization. And to kind of wrap up his pitching career, Dave got a 4-year contract to play in the Swedish Elite League, which is their major league level.
Okay.
And actually made his first All-Star team that year with the Swedish Elite team.
Wow.
Blew out his elbow, never got to play in that game, and tried to come back. There's, again, all these stories. And when he finally tried to pitch again, he blew out his elbow again. And there's, again, a whole long story with that one. But he wound up buying the Indianapolis Clowns.
Oh, wow.
So you can't put a guy like Dave down.
Right.
When he can't pitch, he's going to figure out something else. And so he bought the team and wound up, and this was high-level baseball. So don't. This is, it was the lowest level of pro, but still very high level baseball. These
incredibly
guys were all
high level
to the bigs, and he wound up playing first base for his own team for another 5 years, having to hit, having to do everything.
I think I saw a video where he you dove for a grounder, and it's like a lot of able-legged, everything first basemen don't dive anymore. Right. You were diving into the dirt.
Well, if it meant winning or losing, Dave would put his face in front of a ball.
Right.
And again, Craig, I thought I was competitive, and and I competed at a pretty high level at the University of Georgia track and all those kind of things. And I thought I was competitive, but the bottom line is, if I would have been as competitive as him, I would have been way better.
Yeah. Well,
I not even his mode of competition. Now, sometimes it birthed into anger. Let's just say a little extreme anger to be nice. But he had that fire in him that was amazing, and it was part of the gifting set that he had that got him to the highest level.
Yeah.
And then when you can't play anymore, what do?
You manage and you scout, and he did all that. Yeah. I mean, it goes back to the doctor that said, don't focus on what you don't have, focus on what you had. And Dave had that competitive spirit and that feistiness and that never say never attitude, and that's incredibly valuable in any walk of life. So, okay, I do want to get to that amazing career that you had, but then, let's just talk a little bit about what you guys have been able to do together since meeting. I think there's been books, there's a movie, there's a D3, organization. So just talk about that, because I think that's in itself amazing, because not only is it about Dave, but now it's about how you can impact thousands of other kids and people.
Yes, and we have, and we're coming off actually a weekend of working with the Minnesota Twins organization in Hammond Stadium in Fort Myers, Florida. So it's kind of fresh on our mind what we do and why we do it, and when we don't have enough money, we do it anyway. It's just kind of one of those things. But we had somewhere about 70 children and young adults on the field with the young pro team just this past weekend. Wow. And what we do is we set up kind of like a pro style baseball practice where we set up stations all around the stadium.
Sure.
We set up 5 stations. It's all soft equipment. Balls are flying everywhere. We have, recaps that are just being posted on our Facebook page from this weekend and all those things. And we get to put this camp on and inspire children and young adults to explore their potential like Dave did. And then to add it to it, we added another Dave, because I can't have just one Dave that works with us. I have two Daves. And Dave Stevens is our other Dave, and he was born with no legs.
Okay.
And he is a three-sport athlete who played baseball, football, and wrestled in high school and college. Two-time state champion wrestler. Played for the St. Paul Saints, so had a short contract to play for the St. Paul Saints in Minnesota. And he's a 7-time Emmy Award winner with ESPN.
Wow.
So when I'm bringing these two Daves out to these camps, these families get to see that, just because there's challenges doesn't mean everybody has limits, but we want to find out what those limits are. We want them to explore those potentials, whether they're intellectually challenged or whether they're physically challenged. There's one young man that just comes to mind. He's actually in our recap, and he's in a wheelchair, and I think this is his third camp. And he was I think he was pretty hesitant to come to the first camp.
Sure.
He's in a wheelchair, but now he's playing wheelchair basketball. I think he's even trying to get into the dart world of throwing darts, because he wants to figure out where he can be competitive. It doesn't have to be in baseball, doesn't have to be in basketball or track or whatever it is. We want to find out, where do they fit in, and where do they explore their potential, whether it's in music and arts and business and life, whatever that is. And because I get to present these two Daves and give these kids an actual opportunity to actually hit a ball, run around the bases, crawl around the bases, roll around the bases, whatever the scenarios are, they get this day of excitement with these pro teams. And that's what Disability Dream and Do, or D3 Day, is what it's all about. And we give out t-shirts, we give out hats. The second part of the camp is they also come to the game. We give out an award called the Pulling Each Other Along Award, based on the if you're still, the children's book that I have, A Pound of Kindness, and Dave's story of being pulled in the wagon. And so it's a whole event. And, obviously we're just wanting to do more and more of these. We have 6 more scheduled for this year.
Oh, wow.
Finance is willing, kind of thing, but we do have 6 more events scheduled for this year.
Well, that's amazing.
Yep.
So, just amazing what you guys have done, and even, done together to impact others. So I need to kind of wrap things up, and Dave's having some technical difficulties. And so I might ask you, Doug, just to answer for him. But I got 2 questions. The first one is, we've talked about the 1% better mindset a little bit on this podcast. And then of course you said, hey, he's a 1%er, like, his odds, I think, kind of weren't in his favor, and he exceeded all the odds. But just describe for you, what is this whole 1% better mindset? Like, what have you learned about just Dave and the other Dave, and just working with a lot of people? Like, what is that mindset all about?
Yeah, it's about, even when I do the camps, and I'll refresh, just this weekend I would do a camp. It's like, how can we make it better? It's just that there's little tweaks. I don't want to change a lot, because what we have is kind of a secret sauce that really works. But like little things, like this year we have a logoed ball. That's the softy balls that we use. And we always allow the kids and the participants to get a ball, and they get it signed by the players, and they get this, whatever. But so yesterday at the game, we were actually giving out those balls to the game. We wanted to throw them in the stands, and at some of the stadiums, I think we'll be able to have the kids and the participants throw the balls in the stands. But this net at this arena is too big. There was no way to do that the way they've made those nets in today's game. But we're always looking for that little thing to ratchet us up. How do we make the food experience a little bit better? How do we make the t-shirt sharper? How do we make the hat a little bit better? And Dave's rope climb story is really about that. It's just putting one fist over the next to see how high you can take it. And eventually you get 3/4 of the way and you might be gassed, but then that's when you want to go one more percent higher. And that's the way that we look at it as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, Dave's whole life story is about 1% better. Every step he took just showed him a couple more steps that he could take, and he just kept going one knot at a time, right?
Yeah.
Last question is just, taking a step back from, the work that you do, the camps and this story, but just life lessons. Like, what would you want to pass on to, what you've learned in your life and what you've learned from Dave and the other Dave, and what would Dave say, just life lessons that he'd want to pass on to others?
Yeah, it's exploring your potential. Especially as a parent with a child with limitations, I want my son and all my kids obviously to explore their potential. But especially with the population that we work with at our camps, we want them to explore their potential, and we want the caregivers and the parents to not doubt their hopes. So when they have a dream, don't throw water on their fire.
Yeah.
Let them explore their potential. Let them see how high they can take that. And again, we could go on to major stories, because one of the things that Dave's parents were just incredible examples of is they didn't hold him back.
Yeah.
And even though they doubted, they never showed their doubt. And so there's so many messages that go on with our camps and what we want to do. So we want the parents, when you have a child with limitations starting to dream, let them.
Yeah. Give them opportunities,
Don't
right?
put
Don't
your
hold them
doubt
back.
don't put your doubt onto them. And
Yeah.
even in the book that I co-wrote with Todd Sivan, our Pulling Each Other Along book, we have Chris Nickick, who I know you know.
Yeah, Chris has been on the show. Yep.
It's 1% better.
Yep.
And it's things like that, with Nick and the program that he's putting together. It's just okay. It's just like a process of running. My oldest son is a high-level coach at Northern Arizona University, and these guys, to get 1% better, it's a process. And if you don't, sometimes you plateau, and then sometimes you even get hurt, and then you got to start those steps up again. And it's running is probably, and exercise is one of those things where it's to get 1% better. You do a little bit, you stop, you rest, you do a little bit more, you stop, you rest, you eat right, you do a little bit more, and all of a sudden you're way ahead of the game.
Yeah, I think that's it's the beauty of that message is it applies to every single human on this planet. Like, we all have limitations. Many of them are mental, some are physical, some are other things that have happened to us. And everyone has potential limitations, but how do you reframe it into how far can you go with something, and try to remove obstacles for people rather than putting obstacles in front of people. It's a timeless lesson. So, Dave, I don't know if we got connection back, but any final words of wisdom from you?
Alluding to what Doug was saying is, after I retired due to post polio in 1988, I was watching the NFL on Sunday afternoon with my dad at my parents' house. And my mom sidled up alongside the chair I was sitting in at the time, and just kind of stood there, didn't say anything. And I saw her out of the corner of my eye. I finally looked up, and she looked down, handed me an envelope, said, "Read this." First thing I noticed was the postmark was 1971. And the address on the envelope was to our neighbor from where we lived at the time.
It's a great story, Craig.
Oh my God, it sounds like it. Yeah. Well, I think we can. Sorry, Dave, it's just not coming through very good. So, I think we got plenty of good content. Unfortunately, not all of it. It's all good content. We could go for 2 hours, but thank you guys.